Are we good?
Yes, we're good.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Deborah Brooks, Chair of the Policy and Personnel Board of Ed Work Group. With me today is Dr. Chris Shields, members of my committee, and I would ask Cindy that you could please take attendance for us.
Sure. Do I have to state it out loud, or is it a new procedure?
Yes,
okay.
please. Yes.
Okay. Emily Bays, Deborah Brooks.
Present.
Present.
Okay. Dr. Chris Shields,
Present.
Julie Epstein, Rachel Gilliard, and Beth Weisberg.
Present.
Very good. I see Rachel and I see Beth.
I'm here.
I'm here.
Okay.
She was taking.
Okay. Dr. Shields, would you like to proceed with the beginning of the agenda, please?
Of course, yes. So the first item on our agenda is to just review the minutes from our last meeting, which was October 21st. All members of the board have received the minutes from that meeting. Thank you, Cindy, for taking them so meticulously. Are there any questions or revisions to them?
No.
Okay, then we will accept the minutes as they are submitted. And as people know, from a point of process, they are then put on a public agenda of the school board and then posted. So the next item on the agenda is a personnel update. I would say, from our last meeting, we have since hired the staff developer for technology. We've also hired the associate administrator for data management and supervision, Christine Wise. Both of them will begin on November 30th. I would also share with you that the district has been made aware that our assistant superintendent for business will fulfill her contract through the middle of August, but not be returning after that by her choice. So we have posted the position internally as a vacancy to tentatively start around July 1st. Our goal there is to have some overlap between the new person coming in and Mary Callahan. We have posted the position not only internally here in the district, we also have it on our OLAS, which is a job posting site that we have here in the New York State region. We've also are in the process of posting it nationally in Education Week. New York State Council of School Superintendents and NYSBA as well. We will then distribute it on our listservs for our curriculum administrators, our HR administrators, and I think that is it. So that's the list of all the different places we're going to try and catch as many talented applicants as we can. Any questions about that?
How many years has Ms. Callahan been with the district?
I believe this is her 21st year.
Big shoes to fill.
Yes. She will be missed, and she's been a great service to our community. So I know you all know her well and appreciate the work she does. So Ms. Brooks, I will turn the agenda back to you because I know you're going to share with the community some changes to the order of the agenda.
Yes. Apologies in advance to the community, but we have a bit of shuffling around in the agenda. So the next item on the agenda will be item number 1.4, which is the epidemic and pandemic policy. And we had done extensive work to the existing policy and the new NISPA update from 2020 that resulted from the real life pandemic that nobody could foresee really to be the way it is. But did anybody have any comments on any of the revisions that were made? I think Cindy, you made the revisions in italics. And
Yes,
so
correct.
when it goes on for a first reading, the italics will disappear and, okay. Anybody have any comments about this?
Cindy, you had a clarifying question you were just looking to make sure we followed through on, correct?
That's
Um,
correct.
Can you just ask that question of the committee to make sure the policy as it's written represents what they were hoping for?
Sure. So throughout the policy, there's wording as to contagious diseases. And I know that we had talked about perhaps replacing that with epidemic and pandemic. It occurs throughout the policy. It was not changed. So if that was just the question, if you'd like to go through it and perhaps change some of that wording.
Yeah, Cindy and I had heard at the last meeting that you wanted us to substitute that language out. So we just wanted to make sure, it appears a number of times in the policy, we wanted to make sure we were following through on that if that was important to you.
So can I just add, I think if I remember correctly, we had said that we would add contagious, epidemic, and pandemic. So I don't know that we would necessarily eliminate the word contagious, I thought we had discussed, but we would add the epidemic and pandemic to the contagious, because there may be a differentiation on to what is contagious, what is an epidemic, what is a pandemic. So that, I think that's what we had said, and I think we had said that we would be okay with that, just adding those words. Am I remembering that wrong, guys?
Well, the title is, we changed the title to epidemic and pandemic.
Pandemic.
We don't have contagious disease in the title. So I understand the question is really, what do we want in terms of consistency?
I'm
So-
okay with whatever changes. I just think that it's fine. It's either way. I mean, I don't know that it matters. I thought when we had originally spoken, it was contagious, epidemic, and pandemic. Like, I thought that was the original, but we made, in our discussions, decided to change it to just epidemic and pandemic. Whatever the case is, I think the point that you're making is that it should be consistent, and I agree. So let's just make it consistent.
I mean, there will be times, for example, in number, did anybody want to speak? I didn't, anybody have their hand raised? For example, in number 3, the last sentence where it says, having contracted contagious diseases and has caused the outbreak and contracted contagious diseases, we would want to keep it contagious diseases, because it wouldn't make sense to say have contracted, you know, in that case, we'd want to keep it where it says contagious diseases. So did you have a place in particular, Cindy, where you thought it should be changed?
No, like I know that when we, what's in italics on page 2 was changed, establishing flexible, non-punitive policies and regulations for students unique to a pandemic or a pandemic. But then it was brought up that perhaps we should keep that language throughout the policy. And as we can see from the policy, it's referred to contagious diseases. So I just wanted some clarity as far as what you'd like to remain the same or changed.
Okay, so I just want to note for the record, Dr. Hines has joined us. Well, my thinking is that we should follow the wording in the bullet points, because it refers, it's NISPA's wording and they refer to it as a contagious disease. I think the policy is about what we do with an epidemic overall or a pandemic overall, but then the bullets are more specific in talking about just the fact that it's a contagious disease. I think we're okay.
Yeah, like I don't think it reads incorrectly the way it is. I think it's really just a nuance that is up for discussion. I think it can stay exactly the way it is, and it's accurate. Julie, I see you had a question.
I was just going to agree. In reading through it from the optics of that question, the language in there, it doesn't change anything. And I think we were consistent and clear in what we were trying to say. So I don't think we need to make any changes.
The only thing I noticed was a comma that I thought needed to be deleted.
Sure.
In that bullet point that you mentioned, Cindy, establishing the flexible, non-punitive policies and regulations, there should be no comma after regulations.
Okay,
Please.
sure.
Other than that, anybody else? Done for a first reading? Yes? Good. Let's get this baby to bed. Okay. Keep everybody healthy in the meantime, right? So that we don't have to use that as much as we've been using it. Okay. So next up on the agenda, we're going to move to item number 1.8, which is online distance and remote learning. Okay. So this is a brand new sample policy that was put out, I guess, after March, because districts were floundering with what to do here. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at it. It's uploaded on Board Docs for the public. Oh, by the way, for the public, if you have any comments while we're going along, if you could please reach out to the board via our email address, BOE@portnet.org, and we'll try to monitor our email and respond to your comments if we can, and if not, we will respond to them after the meeting. Okay, so I noticed in this, first of all, does anybody have any comments about the sample policy? I don't see any hands raised or comments. Okay. I noticed that on the first page of the draft, in actually, I guess it's the first paragraph, the last sentence, it says the use of distance learning opportunities, e.g. through BOCES, where students attend class in the district with instruction provided remotely by a teacher in another location. Dr. Shields, does that apply to our school district? Is this language that we need to include? And similarly, onto the next page.
Well, I think what that language is doing is it's giving us flexibility if we wanted to engage in BOCES in a contract. There have been, I can recall a time where we had an upper level course at the high school that was taught by someone outside of the district. So I think that type of language gives the district flexibility to engage a third party like a Nassau BOCES.
Couldn't we also, though, add to that language so it could be either or and or, you know, because I think in our case, I think what Deborah's alluding to is we would be more looking at this policy for our actual online learning that is taking place and how we would, so couldn't we add that part of it and make it giving us the flexibility plus the outlines for our own usage that we're doing right now?
Yes, I think we could tailor it to Port Washington and make it our own. Absolutely. As you know, this is a NISBA policy. We haven't taken a close look at this as a school district yet as a committee. So this is our first look at it. Yes.
Emily, did you have a suggestion as to how you wanted to tailor it?
My suggestion? There's a team of lawyers here. You want my? I could go for it.
No,
I would say that our team of lawyers. I would just say the use of distance learning opportunities through where students attend class in the district with instruction provided remotely by a teacher at another location, or the use of distance learning or the use of distance learning where students, and are in class with the teacher. I don't know how but I would just add the word or for our in-school remote learning. I don't know. I'm giving it back to the lawyers.
No, I get it. Anybody have any comments on that?
Again, if you go further down, Deborah, it says that the district is authorizing the use of district approved online courses. In our case, it's not so much online courses, could be online courses, has been, but it's also online teaching, online, however we're doing. So that's I think what we were more looking for is how are we addressing our online learning that is taking place right now, not through another service or through courses, but the interaction, unless there's another policy to that.
Julie, do I see your hand raised?
Yeah, so the last statement in this policy and actually how the policy reads talks about it's really just giving permission of a district, right, to the use of online or blended courses, but it's not the same as distance learning. So I think the first question from our perspective is, are we utilizing this policy to just give permission that in the need that you can use online or blended courses, or are we tailoring it to distance learning? And then once we delve into that answer and that question, we can go forward and tweak it to, fit Port Washington. I'm not sure we need to tweak it that way. Maybe it is just a policy, again, just to say, as we need it, we can have this permission and access to it, and we shouldn't make it so specific.
Dr. Hines, I saw you wanted to make a comment.
I do. Yeah, this is interesting because I want to be very careful and mindful of the teacher's contract too, when it comes to, utilizing outside agencies to conduct any classwork. So we just need to be careful about that.
And I think knowing what's going on in some other districts, specifically the big cities where they're using really outsourced teachers. I can't say for sure if it's Khan Academy, but they are not using their classroom teachers. The children are actually learning through some other service. So that's why I asked the question about whether all of the language in this policy, whether it applies to Port Washington presently, which I believe it doesn't, and whether we want to keep it there in the event that it eventually will, which I hope it won't, apply to Port Washington. I mean, because we value and we cherish our ability to actually have teachers who we actually hire to teach our children rather than having to farm out, so to speak. Any thoughts? Is this something that we?
What I would recommend is, I think let district office give it a once over. Speak to our attorneys to make sure that everything is okay, and then come back with our recommendations if you're okay with that.
I love that idea. Okay. All right, good. So
Julie had a question.
Actually, my question was that, could we have our attorneys look at it with the eye of the collective bargaining agreement as well? Because I think we don't know all the answers, and it would be nice to have them have a first pass.
okay, so the next step is the lawyers, central office, collective bargaining. We're going to synthesize all of that. Okay, great. All right, is everybody ready to move on to the next agenda item?
Can I just get a sense from the committee? Is it the sense of the committee that we need a policy like this? Is there something missing from our policy manual? I know, Ms. Brooks, you brought this forward. I just want to make sure if we're going to go down the road of enacting something like this and spend time on it, is this something we really want in Port Washington?
The reason I brought this forward was the parts of it that speak to the way students acknowledging that there is distance and remote learning, also acknowledging some of the responsibilities of the students, and I don't know how much this dovetails with the code of conduct, but it further outlines the behavioral responsibilities of the students. It talks about how it gives the district flexibility during emergency situations. So that was one of the reasons. That's really the meat of the second 2 pages. That was my thinking in raising this. Not so that we could have our students learn from truly remote teachers, not just our teachers teaching from their homes, but truly remote. That was not my purpose. My purpose was in gleaning from it that which would be advantageous to Port Washington, which is what I thought the second, mostly the main paragraph without the reference to the BOCES and the other learning opportunities, and then some of the language from the second and the third page. Julie, I saw your hand.
So in light of that, then, so you're suggesting and recommending really a distance learning policy more than anything else. Is that how I understand it?
Yes, distance and remote. Yeah, as opposed to the third party. But I thought a lot of, when I first read this, I said a lot of it sang to me in terms of what we were expecting from our students when they are remote. That I don't know if it's in any other policies right now, but it was very comprehensive, and so I sang to
And just for the record, I also thought the same. I thought that when we were discussing this, it was for distance learning, not outside vendors. So that's where I think we may be wanting. Now, it may come out that we don't actually need one, or we decide later that, we don't think, but I think the direction, Dr. Shields, is for you to try to come up with that type of a policy and then let us discuss it again.
Okay, I appreciate the guidance. Thank you.
Good.
Oh, I have a question, Deb. I'm sorry. So to that point, so we're sending Dr. Shields off to look at the question of, what a distance learning policy is. Is a distance learning policy needed? Under the pandemic policy, we talk about it or we allude to it. And then even in our district safety plan, those further, if that information is brought up again and talks about like online learning and things of that nature. So what's the point and purpose of creating a policy and going through establishing something on distance learning? I might just be missing it. I'm just bringing the question up.
Well, one of the things that the policy alludes to is that it talks about during emergency situations such as extended school closures. I mean, I unfortunately see learning changing. I mean, districts are already talking about if there's a snow day, the kids are going to be home and they're going to learn online. I don't know if that's the wave of the future, even if the buildings are open again. I have my own personal feelings that I won't discuss right now, but so this can relate to the pandemic or a pandemic, but it's not necessarily related to that. So I think we need to look at it as part of what we're experiencing now in a pandemic, but also going forward where there may be online remote learning circumstances that are not related to a pandemic. This is broader than the pandemic. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I understand what you're saying. So I guess though the question goes to the administration, right, to look at that. If it's broader than a pandemic, then when you're talking about snow days, is this how school is changing? We as the board are the what through policy. Are we expecting that we're going to be utilizing this distance learning moving forward, and then they'd establish the how? So I guess to your point, you're looking at just writing a distance learning program or distance learning policy regardless, emergency situations, or if we need to use it because the power went out, or the power is a bad example, but whatever the situation may be, right? That's the direction we're looking as a board to move.
You're asking the question of me or Dr. Shields? Yes, while I do believe it is broader than the pandemic, I do think we need it. I mean, we're in November and hopefully the kids understand what their expectations are, but I do think that we still need it now, but I do think I think it's broader than the pandemic. But I leave it to the administration, right? I mean, if there's a thought that this is superfluous or redundant of any other policy we have, then fine. It's great that we would have something in policy, but so I think it's good to send back, let the lawyers see what they can do with it. Check it with the collective bargaining agreement and so forth.
Dr. Hines, I saw you had a comment.
I know Rachel had one before, and then I'll go after Rachel.
That's okay. I don't mind deferring to you.
Well, I think my only question is, and we'll certainly do that, Deb. We'll review that with the attorneys. I think what the question I have is, and I need to unpack it a little bit more with the cabinet here, is what's the value added of this policy? Like, what's it actually doing that the district will benefit from that we don't have right now? And I think that from a clarity standpoint, that'll be a main discussion point for us. So I just wanted to add that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Can I just, I mean, I think we've discussed this, but I don't know if Rachel, you need anything to add. But I think to Julie's point, we're the what. And the what is, we'd like to make sure that when we're doing online learning and distance learning, where our online and distance learning is in line with our overall district goals. The how we do it is not our, you know, so I think that's really the question. And I think, you know, do we need something, do we need anything specifically for this, I guess, is the other question. And what would this be different than teaching in third grade class pre-pandemic? Like, is there a policy that says what on that? I don't think it is. So I think that there's definitely something that you brought up, Dr. Hines, and Julie, as we're thinking about this. So it may not be needed. I think maybe we just give you guys some time to digest it and think about if there is anything necessary. Maybe we also can check. I know NYSBA's, this is the NYSBA sample policy. And as we're reading it, we see that it's more specific to actual outside vendors, which we're not using. So perhaps let's see if there are any other school districts that have adopted a distance learning policy like we are discussing, to see if there's something we can, you know, build on. That's what I would suggest going forward. But Rachel's been waiting. Sorry, Rachel, I jumped in.
It's okay. I don't mind. So I was going to say, I agree with everything Emily just said, by the way. I think, you know, it sounds good to have central office take a look at it. It sounds good to have the attorneys take a look at it, although I don't think there's a problem with any of our bargaining units contractually on this. But those are both really good steps. In general, I'm in favor of the idea of a policy like this. I think we were just confronted with a circumstance where we had a lot of uncertainty about what was appropriate and what was allowed in the district from many different parties about online learning. And so part of the purpose of policy is to codify things so that expectations are clear and everybody has a solid understanding, but you want to do it in a very broad way so that you're not locked in when the next circumstance arrives and it's not exactly the same. So with all that in mind, I think I would be in favor of broadening this, not to just be contracting with outside vendors, because I agree that's not what we're talking about currently, but it should be open that that could be what it means if we are confronted with a circumstance where the superintendent at the time believes that that's necessary and appropriate. We don't want to slam doors with policy unless it's, you know, something like corporal punishment, which we do want to slam a door on. So in general, I think this is a great idea, but this is not the policy for us yet. It's not there yet. Some work needs to be done to get there, but I think, Deborah, I agree with you about bringing this up and discussing it. The only shame of it, of course, is that sometimes you realize that you have the need for something like this after you have already had to deal with the messy circumstance where it would have been good to have it.
Yes. So, I mean, I see things of value in the policy. Just, you know, reading through numbers, you know, 1 through 8, and 8 really struck me because it says Parents, guardians, and families must understand that while their assistance may be needed to resolve technological issues, their presence during learning time may be distracting to their students as well as to the teacher and other students during live virtual classes. That's NISBA's language, not mine. So obviously there are issues there that NISBA understands needed to be codified, to use your word, Rachel. So anyway, I would appreciate it if we're all in agreement on the committee that this go to central office and have them see if there's anything of value in here first, and then to, if so, then to powwow with the attorneys. Can we all agree on that? Yes, I see heads nodding. Yes, great.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Okay. Like the consensus. All right, now moving on. Yes? Okay. So the next item on the agenda, we will actually jump to 1.6, which is the social media policy discussion, which kind of sort of dovetails with news media relations, but we'll start with the social media policy discussion first. So there currently is no formal policy called the social media policy. I think the closest thing that comes to that would be the news media relations loosely. But I know, Emily, I think this is something that you had wanted to discuss. We were all in agreement with you, but I feel like this is the baby. So if you want to introduce it, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, I actually think that we should look at our news media relations policy and add something to it with regards to social media. So there's two ways that school districts, I believe, have looked at it in the past. One is, does the district itself have a practice on its own social media platform? In other words, do districts encourage? Some districts go outwardly and communicate with their community through Facebook, through Instagram, and they have an exchange back and forth. And so they have set some sort of guidelines. We as a district have not done that. We've kind of had a conversation a while back that we didn't want to do that. So what I think we need to do is somehow enhance our media relations to include social media and to set some sort of guidelines on how we as individuals that are on the Board of Education, what we're expected to do on social media, and whether or not when we as individuals represent something or say something on social media, is it in fact our official position? We've also heard a lot back from community members who are confused that when we're commenting on a social media page, are you speaking on behalf of the school district or are you speaking on behalf of yourself? And, so I think that was my goal, is that we have some sort of a policy in place where it's clear what we can and cannot do, or what we will and will not do on social media. So that was my suggestion and my goal.
All right, Julie, you have a question?
So just to clarify from Emily, so you started off saying, does the district have a practice on its own social media platform? So the district has Facebook, the schools are using Instagram and Twitter, and then you brought it around to how a board operates, right, on social media. So I'm assuming we're looking at it from that two-pronged approach, not just, as a district, but district and board. So I just want to clarify that, right?
Yes, and I think that's why I thought we would add it. So that's why I thought we would go look at the news media relations, and maybe it's, news and social media relations, and somehow we add in that policy because there isn't, if you look at NISBA, and even if you look and see, it's kind of a fine line to create a social media policy in what we can and cannot do. But we do have a policy on the way we deal with the news media. And now, as we know, social media is the real news media. So we should maybe look at that.
Okay, did anybody have any comments before I jump in? Okay, so I actually agree with you that we should add social media somewhere in the title to the news media relations policy. But you have social media where the board members have absolutely really no access, like the Port Washington Facebook page, Port Washington Twitter. It's, from what I understand, individual board members cannot post there. You have, I mean, the news media relations outlines very clearly that if somebody, it's the board president who speaks on behalf of the board, unless they designate somebody else. It's the superintendent who speaks on behalf of the district. Individual board members are entitled to speak, but they have to make it clear that they're not speaking on behalf of the board. I mean, all that is outlined in the more comprehensive media relations policies that that are up on board docs. But then there are community pages on social media where board members are community members, but sometimes speak with knowledge of board members, and then there are board members' individual pages. So how far do we think we need to drill down on this to it's really, I think it's twofold. It's for the board members to understand their individual responsibilities and limitations in terms of communication while not infringing on First Amendment rights. And it's also for the community to understand what we can and cannot be expected to say on social media. So how do we start to really write that into policy? Do we ask our lawyers to start drafting? Do we give our individual concepts following that outline? Are we in agreement?
I saw Rachel raise her hand.
Oh. Rachel?
So this doesn't help us drill down, but one general comment. I'm not convinced that we should collapse social media and news media into one policy or one thought, because I think that they are distinctly different and people need to understand that they're distinctly different. Part of our problem with social media is that it blurs all the lines. And so, if anything, we want things to be clearer and have some certainty. I do think our major issue in this area is any confusion that there has been with members of the public thinking that something is an official communication when they are speaking to one board member on social media, or if one board member is saying something that is representing their own opinion, which is obviously completely permissible, but they are not representing the entire board on social media ever. And so we do need a lot of certainty here. But I'm open to how to go about this. And I think, I wanted to make the overall point about having social media and news media be different, but I think that that could be achieved in several different ways. It could be one policy that has two subsections to it. And so it's clear we're talking about two different things. It could be two separate policies. I don't know how we want to proceed on that from here. I think our attorneys would tell us, in terms of your question about, board member positions on social media, what our attorneys I know will say is we cannot make any restrictions on an individual's speech, right? A board member always has a right to state their individual opinion. They do not have the right to speak for the board, however, and where the problem arises is where, from the perception of the community, that is blurred, and the community doesn't understand if the board member is speaking for themselves or speaking as a member of the board. That's just a difficult piece to navigate, period, in the world. It's not just our problem. But if we could figure out how to codify that so there is something to point to so that people will understand it a little better, I think that that would perhaps be a good goal to achieve here.
Julie, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to help recommend that under the guidelines that were submitted in board docs, we had the recommendation where it asks, should the board address the use of social media by board members in policy? It's item number 7 under the guidelines, and it outlines the direction you could take, and just not even call it, just having a very robust media relations policy, which then, to Rachel's point, could drill down, you know, covering news matters, social media, etc. And then if you want to include what it recommends, which it talks about the district's aspirations for what constitutes appropriate etiquette, consequences, and then you know, summarize it from that standpoint. So that gives a beginning or a starting point if we wanted to go from there, if that's the direction. And that way it would combine that news media policy more into a media relations policy.
Rachel? And just, I'm sorry, just so the public understands, the guidelines that to which Julie was referring was actually a pamphlet that NISPA created for social media, and it is on board docs, and it's teeny tiny writing, but those were the points to which she was referring.
I think that that's a decent suggestion. My concern, or maybe the thing we need to address to take this one step further, is even their answer to this number 7 is pretty vague, right? So I'm not sure how we drill it down to something that's less vague. And I think what they're talking about here is really codifying in policy things that are already binding on board members, right? So board members already are not allowed to violate their oath of office. We are already not allowed to violate any laws. We are already, subject to confidentiality restrictions for things that we hear in executive session, and for various other issues. So in a way, we currently do not have a board that I think acts inappropriately on any of this stuff. But I don't know if there is a reason or a way to make this more into a social media policy as well. I guess, Julie, I'm asking you, like, is there something, what would the next step be to take this? Because I feel like NISPA hasn't given us a whole lot of guidance right here.
I guess I was just reading it as, you know, the guidance that I see coming out of this is, while we know and we understand, sometimes codifying the etiquette that we should use, right? So maybe what we're saying is, as a board, it is our policy that, you know, we're going to funnel all media relations, social media relations, news media relations through the board president. And while an individual board member can comment on their own personal pages, we recommend and have an expectation that it would only be the board president that would communicate via social media on global pages, more public pages, right? So it would be at that discretion of the board president, if that's the direction we want to go. I don't think and I agree, this is a very slippery slope because you are treading on, you know, First Amendment rights, but I think you can set up expectations of etiquette so that people know the process in place. And if we don't want to be as specific as saying it's just to the board president, it could be the board president or their designee, you know, but that is up at the discretion of the board president. But I think we just are looking at how to handle not personal social media pages, but public social media pages and how we communicate as a board to the public, because it does get misconstrued no matter how we present it. They think we're giving official information. Even when I say something just in conversation with somebody, not even on social media, I feel like I have to codify and say, or qualify and say that, you know, I'm speaking as Julie Epstein, not the board member. I'm sure they still hear it as Julie Epstein, the board member, but you know, you cannot say it enough. And social media, unfortunately, has a lot to be misconstrued.
I think it needs to extend to your personal pages as well, though, because if I post something, I will say wearing my parent hat. I mean, even on my personal page, because I know people look to me as a board member. It's as somebody said, you may think that you're just a parent in the community, but to other people, you are always a board member. I'm sorry, Rach, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I agree with Julie. I mean, I try to add the qualifier as well. I think we all do, because I think this is a board that is very conscientious. I think there are boards in the world that are not. I think this is a board that tries to make sure that there isn't confusion, but there always will be a certain amount of confusion. The only comment I was going to add is I'm pretty sure we have it codified elsewhere in policy already that the Board of Education president speaks officially for the board. I can't remember which policy number it is. Do you remember?
I'll tell you which it is, because I said we should add it as a cross-reference. It's 2220.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess we should further discuss, but we should make sure that we're not creating something that's duplicative of what already exists.
So can I just add that I do think, based on what NYSBA's guidance is with the guidelines that they've given us, that, and going back to what Julie pointed out, the paragraph 7 there on the guidelines, in that our news media relations should not be news media, but it should be media relations. And I do believe that we should have something in it with regards to etiquette and what is proper usage of media relations by the board. I understand that none of us are violating any of our duties and the oaths that we have taken. That doesn't, though, stop community members from believing that we use social media to disseminate information that is board business, which we do not. Now, have we been guilty of posting on parent pages on Facebook board business that until we were told we couldn't do it by those actual pages, we stopped doing? So the point is, I think we need, like, we may be conscientious now, but the policy is not about us. It's about the direction of the school district in general, and the information that should be available to community members about what is practiced in our school district and what we believe in as a school district. So I don't think we should get stuck on what we as individuals right now are doing. I think we should say, okay, have we had some confusion in the past? We've absolutely had confusion in the past. So let's just bring it back and clear it up is my thinking.
Rachel, I just wanted to say something in response, and then I acknowledge you. I think one of the things we need to make clear is that social media is not part of our chain of command. And I think that if we can establish that, the community hopefully will be retrained, right? Instead of posting comments, complaints, questions on social media that they want an administrator or the board to answer, they need to follow the chain of command. And I think that would take a lot of the pressure off of us as community members to feel that we need to jump in and answer something. I don't know how much we will succeed in that ambition, but I think that's where we get stuck a lot. We see a complaint on social media and we feel we have to jump in and say, please don't talk about, we don't have the right to say, please don't talk about teachers here, but if you have a complaint, please do this or that. And then it snowballs. So I just wanted to say that as well. Rachel, you had a comment?
I agree with everything you just said, Deborah. I'm not sure how much of an impact rewriting a policy can have, but we can certainly try, because definitely having the community understand what the chain of command looks like is in the best interest of everybody, right? Because if a parent or community member has an issue, we want it to go to the appropriate place so that it can be addressed appropriately. And the district wants that feedback to come to them. We don't want people sort of shouting into the wind on social media and hoping that one of us sees it and then inappropriately escalates it, because that is not the role of a board member. We shouldn't be acting that way. Just on what Emily said, I want to make sure that the word guilty of posting on pages of social media is not misunderstood. I know Emily I'm sure, agrees with me on this and did not intend to imply that there has been board member wrongdoing, because I don't think that I have seen any board member wrongdoing on social media. I think that the point she was making is that when board members post on social media, sometimes there is confusion from the public as a result of it, but it is not actually, a criminal act.
See, thank God for those lawyers on this committee that could clear up a non-lawyer statement.
There will be
yes,
no
please,
admissions on my watch.
For the record, yes, thank you. Can I just make a suggestion for us to, because we're going to move forward. So, Deborah, you had gone back and you had made some changes already on your own to the current news media relations policy, and it's on board docs, right? So you tweaked things. I think there's a document that says Mrs. Brooks' suggestions on board docs.
I think it says from D. Brooks, another district.
Okay, so I'm going to take D. Brooks,
learned
another
to-
district. Okay, what I'm suggesting, I think D. Brooks, another district looks good. So what I would like to propose, if we can blend and then bring and is do D. Brooks, another district, because it does talk a little bit more detail about how the representative is the board president and whatnot, which our media relations policy does not say those things. And then what I would add to that, just for points of clarity, is the information that we were given in the guidelines by NISBA, that paragraph 7, that talks about, a little bit about the etiquette of board members. So again, that's what I see as us blending all of our discussions together. And then maybe if we could do that and bring it back to the committee to read, we could then start making line changes and, more detailed changes or adding stuff, because I feel like right now we're having a conceptual discussion, which we absolutely need to do. But I think to move it to the next thing now, if we could just have it laid out for us in writing, and then we can add things or take away things or whatnot. That's my suggestion.
So are you proposing, just so Cindy knows exactly what to put where? Is it legal for, let's say, the chair to glean from this social media guideline document that NISBA provide a draft to Cindy so that we can put it into board docs the next time? Are you so to give?
Doesn't have to be you, Deb. It could be Cindy doing it with Dr. Shields also. But if I know that's one of your strengths as a human, not even as a board member. You can do things like that. So if you wanted to do that, I think process-wise, that's fine.
Okay.
But if we wanted, if Dr. Shields did it, that'd be fine too. It's up, When I was chair, I would have never done that, right? I would have been like, here you go, but you're good at that. So
No,
go
just
right
trying
ahead.
to understand so that nobody's duplicating anybody else's efforts or stepping on toes. Just wanted to know, who should be doing what. So, Dr. Shields, whatever makes you comfortable.
Yeah, I think why don't Ms. Brooks, why don't you and I discuss that process? But I think the ultimate goal is to bring back to our December meeting a draft for the committee to review. And Ms. Brooks, you and I can discuss, how we get to that.
Perfect. Okay. Does anybody else have anything else they would like to have included in the social media / news media discussion? No. Okay. All right. So the next thing, that was great. Thank you everybody for your input. It gets a little muddy, right? When we're trying to make our own policy out of something that's not exactly before us, but we have it in our brains what we want to do. So thank you. Okay. So next on the agenda for more synthesizing fun is the chain of command, which is number 1.17 on the agenda. So I had gone through our policies. We have several. our policies are called public complaints, which is policy 1400, complaints about policies 1410, and complaints about curricula and instructional materials 1420. And Mr. Greenstein had mentioned in a prior meeting that we were striving to have our policy numbers align with NISBA's, just to keep everything nice and tidy. So I reached out to NISBA, and they currently maintain only what we know as policy 1400 and 1420. They do not maintain policy 1410. And then there's a 1440. I wasn't sure which one that was. Sorry. So that's not to say we need to rescind everything, but that was just their guidance. Oh, 1440 is complaints about personnel. So I had also thought, okay, let's see what other neighboring districts are doing, because our policies go back to 1992. So we're really in the last century on this. And Manhasset's is just lots of words and very comprehensive. Roslyn has a flow chart. If it's this type of complaint, then your parent reaches out to this person and this person and this person and follows that. And Syosset was a real flow chart, literally with arrows, and that's all in the board docs. And so I didn't know what direction the committee wanted to travel, so or none of it. But I think it's really important that the community understand what the chain of command is, why it exists, and how we are begging them to follow it. That really simplifies things for everybody. Emily?
I just think that we should not get too specific. Again, with the overall, the what, the having a flow chart with, we don't want to make, I think ours says generally the normal channel for complaints will be from the complainant to employee to building principal to central office supervisor to the superintendent of schools to the Board of Education. And that is our chain of command. So I don't know that we need to do anything more specific than that. I don't think it should be, well, if you're at the elementary, you have to go here. And if you're a SUSA, you have an assistant principal before you, I think we need to just leave it as general as possible. I'm looking at our policy. I don't know that I would make any changes other than to say that we've, looked at it and changed the date from 92, unless somebody else has any suggestions. But that's my input. Dr. Hines has a comment.
Yes. So I just want to, set the stage here a little bit as far as why this is coming up. And I think, Deb, you kind of set the table a little bit, but let me just, for those who are watching, I think there are 7 people watching and 4 of them may be us, but anyway, doesn't mean that they'll watch it at a later date. I know since March, since all of this happened, whatever we had in place was thrown out the window for the most part, like a lot of things as far as communication and everything else. So I know for a fact that the board has been inundated with an incredible amount of emails, as opposed to going to the teacher first, going to the assistant principal, going to the principal, then maybe to Dr. Mioli or to Dr. Shields, then myself, and then the board. It would go right to the board. And so the purpose of, I think, this conversation is to reinforce and to remind the community that there is a chain of command, and to really come up with something that's either a lot tighter, or, as Emily was saying, kind of taking what we have that's already existing and, maybe modifying just a little bit. But I know the chain of command was pretty much thrown out the window, and not just with the board, by the way, certainly with myself, where I would redirect emails to the teacher first and to the principal. So I just wanted to set that stage before we go further in this conversation.
Julie, have a comment?
Yes, so I was just going to say, I do agree that we need to have a broad general policy. But when the example provided for Manhasset, while it's a lot of words, I thought they really sectioned it out nicely, especially when they specifically say complaints about specific classroom practices should be directed to the teacher. Then they section off complaints about board policy, you would send this way, complaints about personnel. So maybe just, and in view of what Dr. Hines just said, maybe just to provide better guidance to people to know, don't start at the board and work down. Start in the classroom and then work up, because you will be more effective. So if we're putting that part of it in policy, it might provide for better direction for them.
I was going to say, if we were going to keep our existing policy, to move the last paragraph into the center of it, to say all concerns should be resolved at the earliest possible level. But because that's really what we want people to do. We don't want them to immediately have the knee-jerk reaction of reaching out to the board, which is what the second paragraph addresses, really. So I guess as in prior, and also I think something should be added that a response should be expected within, I think we should give guidance that a response should be, I hate to use the word timely, so I don't want to use the word timely. I don't want to give a specific number of days, but one of the main complaints that we hear is, I reached out to the teacher and never heard back. Reached out to the teacher again, I never heard back. So what would the committee think about somewhere along the way, whichever we decide to synthesize, that we add some type of an expectation on the staff that they need to respond, or if they don't respond, is there an automatic escalation to the next level? Like, give parents an understanding of what will happen when they follow the chain of command, or the chain of communication, or the channel of communication, however you want to say it in plain English.
So Beth had her hand raised, and I have a comment as well. Beth, do you want to go first?
Thanks, Emily. My comment about this is, I hear you. I think that's regulation, though, that Dr. Shields and Dr. Hines should develop, not that we would develop as a board. That's just my opinion. Maybe Dr. Hines, you could weigh in, but I feel like that's something that should be sort of more staff regulation.
Definitely. I certainly agree. I think, we have the chain of command. If and when a parent reaches out to a teacher or a principal, and the principal or any administrator, they don't get back, we should then, enforce the timeliness of what should take place. Yeah, I have no problem with that whatsoever.
And that's what I actually was going to say as well, is that chain of command actually says first teacher, then the next person. So, you could, if you reached out to your teacher, you haven't heard from your teacher, you would then go to the principal and say, I reached out to the teacher, waited a week, it hasn't come. Like, those are reasonable kind of things that I think people need to start. I don't think we need to have it laid out like that. I will also say that I agree with your suggestions, Deb, about moving the paragraph around. I think that's a good suggestion. I also, and again, this is Manhasset, so you all know how I feel about that, but I will agree with Julie's suggestion of adding, the little sections that they've had about, if you have a school, it should go here. If it's a policy, it should be here. So, and unfortunately, we're being recorded, so it's actually public information that I agreed with something that Manhasset said, but I will agree. I'm only agreeing because Julie said it, not because of Manhasset.
And I just want to tag on when I say regulation, the nice thing about having it in regulation to say, like, parents who say, well, they haven't gotten back to me and it's only an hour, to be able to say, well, we said 2 days, and like, you need to give them 48 hours to respond, and then go to the principal and give them 48 hours. So I think it's more it's sort of to hold both ends feet to the fire, so that a parent is not calling Dr. Hines' office or emailing board members in a panic that I've contacted all these people in the last 24 hours. Well, you can give anybody the time. So it works both ways, I think, too.
Does anybody else have any other comments? Because I'm sorry, Emily, you're pointing, and I'm not sure if I missed it.
Rachel.
Rachel?
It's okay. It's hard to see all of us. There's nobody ahead of me. So the only thing I want to add to this discussion, I think all of that sounds good. I think some of the confusion over the past 6 months has been that we were in a pandemic. And so things were an emergency, or they felt like an emergency. And when we were doing online learning, I think there was a lot of confusion from parents, reasonably so, about what the chain of command actually even looked like anymore. And for that, I'm speaking for people who would have known there was a chain of command, because I don't think that's everybody. The other thing, though, is I think you only solve so much with policy. I think well-drafted policy is really important. But I'm wondering, and this is not for us, this is for the administration, but I'm wondering if what we actually need is a little bit of education of the community to remind them that this is what the chain of command looks like, so that, I mean, it's two-pronged, right? We want it to happen appropriately, but I think people should also understand that the district is not in the business of preventing parents from commenting or getting their questions answered or even bringing their complaints. I mean, the district wants to hear all of that stuff because the goal is to provide the best education we can provide, and that includes feedback. Maybe if a little publicity happened so that parents understood, this is where I go, and then this is where I go, and then this is where I go, they would understand that it actually is not that difficult to get yourself heard on whatever the issue is. And I think the chain of command is not always necessarily the same for certain specialized issues. So I don't know if that goes in there as well.
And a lot of people don't know what chain of command is, which is why I said channel of communication or whatever we want to call it. But Emily, did you want to say something?
Yes, I think Rachel makes a point about, it's one thing to write a policy, another thing to have it be known what it is. So I think she's right about that. I do believe, though, that Dr. Hines, at some point, I remember there was a letter that went out, I believe, to the community reminding everyone what the chain of command was in the midst. But again, it was kind of in the midst of all the craziness, and perhaps it was lost on parents, or it didn't matter. People were just still panicking. But what I think might be helpful, just to Rachel's point, is that maybe once we have this policy updated, that we put it somewhere on on the website. So right by, and maybe we can actually put it right where you're looking up staff members' emails, because we now have a search on the website where we can search people's names. So maybe there we kind of put the chain of command protocols or policies right underneath on that page, so that at least it's front and center. If, again, you may already know your teacher's email and you may not go to the website, but just somehow, if there's a way for us to just get that message out, maybe there's a little extra we could do. But I think Rachel makes a good point. We don't know that people really know the policy, but the more we could do to let people know.
Beth, I saw you had a comment.
I do. I think we're discussing this as policy, and I think it's good to update our policy. I think there could be further conversation amongst the administrators on how best, perhaps it's at the beginning of the year, perhaps it's part of the welcome letter to the school every year of, this is the chain of command that we ask you to use, and this is how we resolve issues. I know in my many years involved in SEPTA, I had always made the suggestion that at IEP meetings that be a sheet sort of handed. As Rachel said, for different things, the chain of command is different. So for a special education student, there's a very different chain of command, because the special education staff report to the director of special education. They don't necessarily report to the building principal. So there may be a different chain of command for some of those issues that need to be resolved. So I think that perhaps we should have the policy conversation, but noticing what's been going on this year with how much email has come to the Board of Ed, we should sort of maybe take that as at the district level with our administrators and say, it might be time for a reminder to the community in some way, shape, or form to our parents and staff, and perhaps just sort of codify how we do that every year just to make sure, because the truth is, you're right, we're all right. Those of us who were heavily involved parents, which is everybody sitting here, we all understood chain of commands, but a parent who suddenly, who has been very happy with the school district and all of a sudden has an issue doesn't always understand how to get that issue resolved. It's a little more difficult if your first issue comes in 9th grade that you feel you need to deal with. So, and it's very different in 9th grade versus in 1st grade. So even those changes are pretty significant.
Okay, so Julie likes the Manhasset policy generally in format. Emily agrees with Julie. Emily agrees with me that if we use our format, we should move the bottom paragraph into the middle. Let's figure out a game plan for synthesizing these ideas and coming back to the table with one document instead of, I think, 3 or 4 different ones, at least with respect to policy 1400. Do we want to synthesize? What do we want to do with respect to 1400? And let's keep in mind that we also have 1410, which is complaints about our policies, and 1420, complaints about curricula and instructional materials. So
I would say I like that those 3 are separate, because I think they're very distinct issues that come up in our community. I think if you merge them into one, it's going to require the outsider to have to dig into one policy. So I think keeping them separate, when you look at the table of contents as they appear on the website, they will be easier to find for any community member.
okay. The Manhasset one actually incorporates the complaints about board policies into its policy 1400, into its overall public complaints. But Dr. Shields, you would like to keep complaints about policies as a separate, which is fine. Any other, Julie?
Although I like the Manhasset policy, I think that that's a great suggestion also for the reasons that he brought up. So I would be fine if we wanted to keep them separated and think that that's fine. I mean, I think it's fine.
Okay. So,
And any chance that we don't follow Manhasset, I love.
okay. So with respect to the mother load policy 1400, do we want to rework our existing policy by incorporating the aspects of the Manhasset policy into 1400 and bring that back for further board discussion? Or is that what we want to do? Or do we want to move the last paragraph of our existing policy and make it the middle paragraph?
I think based on what Dr. Shields said, though, right? We want to keep it separate. So put in the last paragraph into the middle paragraph, and just make sure that it's updated in that sense, is what I thought we were going toward.
We're talking about two. We have 3 different policies we're talking about. So I'm talking about Manhasset Public Schools ones. It's policy number 1400 for them and for us, where Julie liked some of the language in there, taking out complaints regarding board policies.
Okay.
In that's
what I'm talking about, just taking that out. Okay. Yeah.
But my question is, so do we want to work from our existing public complaints and just move the bottom paragraph up? Or do we want to incorporate some of Manhasset's language into ours? Because Julie said she liked some of the language in the Manhasset complaint. So I'm just trying to understand where we are just with respect to 1400. Julie, since you talked about Manhasset, do you have a feeling on that?
So my comment was that I'm fine if we want to take our third paragraph of our policy 1400, move it up to the second paragraph, and maybe just enhance the language of the second paragraph to not only be a little clearer, but also that incorporate Rachel's suggestion of making sure maybe some of those specialized asks or complaints could be incorporated into them as well. And again, and maybe by specialized, it's even reminding people that there are APs at the secondary level. I think that's often forgotten and they go directly to a principal, things of that nature. That's how you could enhance that second paragraph language.
Okay, so how do we want to make sure that all of these ideas get translated? Because right now we're giving concepts, we're not giving specific language. So do we want to draft something to give to Cindy and Dr. Shields? Because right now we're not quote unquote dictating anything. We're not dictating specific language. So do you want to cut and paste and call from what you like in Manhasset? And Rachel, you can we can try to synthesize and forward that on. How does that sound to everybody?
I think that sounds good. I mean, it sounds like I agree with what everybody's saying. I like the Manhasset as well. The other reason that I really like it is because I think a thing that we hear a lot, not a lot, like every day, but frequently we hear there's no procedure for appealing things to the board. Right? Why isn't there oversight of this? Why isn't there appeal process? And I think that goes to the same issue of a basic misunderstanding of what the chain of command looks like and how decisions are made in the district and who you should be talking to about various decisions. So I like how clearly Manhasset is laid out, because what people want is a blueprint, not just the philosophical underpinnings of how this works. If I have a complaint, they want to know really, who do I talk to? What do I do? What is the next step? Who is going to respond to me? What do I do if I don't like that? And I think the Manhasset one is nice and clear. And I think that dumping this on Dr. Shields and Cindy and saying, here, turn it into something seems a little unfair.
Exactly. Very onerous and cumbersome.
Okay, so then to that point, so then I am looking at the Manhasset policy for ease and the paragraph beginning with generally, but the maybe fourth sentence that starts with complaints about specific classroom practices all the way through till, if necessary, the conclusion of that paragraph. If we cut and paste that and put it into that would be our second paragraph in our policy. Do you want to start ahead of the word complaints? The second complaint sentence, I guess, or third.
I'm trying to copy.
Does everyone agree or see where I'm?
Yes, I see where you're going. I think it's fine. The question is, does Cindy see it?
Right.
Yeah, you're good. Okay.
Well, are you going to provide us a draft though of every, or? Yeah.
Deborah, are you doing that? Okay.
Yeah. So are you saying that becomes our second paragraph? I'll massage it. I'll work it through. I'll make it.
I mean, I think it can become our second paragraph. It basically says what we say in our second paragraph, just a little more specifically, but yet generally in the same regard. And of course, the language needs to change because district coordinator would not be the language that we use because it's not applicable to our school district.
Yep.
The question is do you want to include anything else after that? And also the question is do we need to be more specific? I think of special ed, Beth brought up the point, and also to Rachel's point, I think of special ed, I don't know if people know the direction they're supposed to go. And I understand a policy is supposed to be general and broad, but if there's a way we can incorporate, that direction and still make it broad, I think that would be helpful. I'm not sure I know how to do it. I agree with the concept. I think that's something that's missing, and maybe it's just education. It's not a policy.
Okay. Okay, so we can work through that. Since we know what our general goal is, it's not as though we're working behind the scenes. We know what we want to accomplish, and we just have to try to figure out the right words to put it in there to have our ideas actually light on the page. Okay. There is a line in the Manhasset policy. Thank you, Emily. Yes. We have an ambitious agenda. There is a line in the Manhasset policy that says at the end of Roman numeral 2, the board will not act on complaints that have not been first explored or investigated at the appropriate levels as set forth above. Exceptions will only be made only when complaints concern board action or board operations. Do we want to?
I love that line, and that's from Manhasset. I love that
You
line.
don't want to overlook that.
No, I think that's an important distinction to make because that's where we, to Dr. Hines' point earlier, how the pandemic kind of changed, put everything upside down. But that's what happened. That people people still believe they come to the board and we're going to make changes. And I think that that's important to add in our policy.
Okay. Everybody agree? Oh, Rachel, I see your hand.
No disagreement with the overall principle, but I'm wondering if this is codified somewhere else, because I feel like it's a given, but again, this is an education issue that people don't understand the role of the administration versus the role of the board. And also, I think I will note in the pandemic, there was a lot of confusion about this too, because the reopening plan was in this crazy, weird gray area, not the same as creating a new curriculum or something like that that was in the normal course. So I don't know that it would have helped us then. But I guess, you know what, we don't have to answer my question now, but like going forward, we should make sure that we are not replicating what's elsewhere or contradicting what's elsewhere. We want to just make sure things match up if this is somewhere else. That's all I'm saying.
And Deb, if I could add, I think
Please.
that sentence you just read, the board will not act on complaints. I think if you inserted that at the end of what's the current paragraph 2 of 1400, I think it sort of puts an exclamation point on, here's the chain of command, and by the way, the board's not going to recognize anything if you don't follow this chain of command. So I think it could fit nicely in there at the end of what we call the old or the current paragraph 2.
Which will become
That's
the
a good
new
point.
paragraph 3.
Right. Yeah.
Great point. I will do that. That's great. Okay. Anybody else on that one? Okay. So that actually takes care of 1400, but we still have 1410. Is everybody okay with the language in 1410, which is complaints about policies? The one question I had in the last paragraph, the first line, board members who receive complaints individually, it says may refer them to the superintendent. Is it may, or do we want it to be shall or must? Are we giving the board members the discretion? Yes, I see heads shaking. Yes, in agreement. We want them to have discretion. Okay, so then can we say that
They may, and we've already clarified that they cannot act upon them themselves anyway. So, they may refer them or they may respond by saying, follow the chain of command. So I think it's fine. Leave it as may.
Okay. So there are no changes to policy 1410. Right? Except for, I don't know, do we need to maybe just say reviewed, at the very bottom, so that somebody 20 years in the future knows that it actually got reviewed in the 21st century?
Yeah, we do. We do an update. When we discussed it, we get added the date.
Okay. Okay, great. And then the remaining one is policy 1420. If we want to end at 11, I can stop here and we can go forward with 1420 at our next meeting. Because I actually had some thoughts about 1420, which is complaints about curricula and instructional materials. So I leave it to everybody else what you want to do in terms of time.
I think personally, while I find all of this important, I think we should be respectful of the administrators that are on and have, carved out this amount of time and not hold them much longer past this. So if we can, put this on the next agenda, I think that would be great.
Yep. Everybody in agreement? Okay. So then I just wanted to close by adding that board members have, courtesy of NISPA, have been attending webinars discussing equity, inclusivity, diversity in education. It's a very important topic that NISPA has taken on, and the board also, and Dr. Hines and the district feel it's crucial that the board and the district tackle this. And so NISPA has drafted a policy that encompasses equity, inclusivity, and diversity. And we're going to bring that on in December and discuss that as a board at our next meeting. It is a board goal, yes, as Emily has written, it is a board goal. So I just wanted to mention that. Our agendas tend to be very ambitious. We have a lot we want to cover this year. We had some ground to make up from last year that kind of ate into September. So I apologize for not getting to everything on the agenda. We're learning as we go along. If we're putting too much on if our eyes are bigger than our stomachs. But anyway, so the next meeting is December 16th. Same time, same bat channel.
Deb, I
Yeah.
just want to add that I checked the BOE email and I don't see any community comments or questions that have
Thank
come
you.
up for the record.
Thank you. And of course, if anybody watches this in their leisure, maybe while they're digesting turkey and they decide they have some questions for the board, you can always reach out to us at boe@portnet.org. Anybody have any concluding remarks, questions, comments? No. Okay, as a policy matter, we hope you all stay safe and healthy and have an enjoyable Thanksgiving and hopefully find something for which to give thanks this year. All right, see you all in December. Thank you.
Thank you.